It's time to step into the Coming Out Lounge, a cool, safe space to be true to your sexual self. With your host, Rick Clemens. Rick has helped hundreds of people come out of the closet, and now each week he's bringing you cool insights for loving and accepting yourself, boosting your self-confidence, and living a guilt-free, purpose-filled life on the other side of the closet doors. Cuddle up with yourself and get ready for heartwarming coming out stories, ideas for living authentically, and tips for being fully self-expressed. Now here's your host, Coming Out Coach Rick.
Hey, Closet Busters, you know what time it is. It's that time once again to step out, step up, and step into living your powerful truth. And sometimes that powerful truth is, well, kind of saying the words, I'm gay and I'm Catholic. And for many of us, our faith and our sexuality are the two things that keep us in the closet the most because, man, they didn't know how to play nicely together in the sandbox of life. But then often by some fate of chance and that inner desire, the novels of our lives, they just kind of unfold and life is no longer fiction. It becomes a real reality because we finally did choose to say those words, I'm gay. And today we're going to be talking to a pretty cool author who's just released 4 books, and he's got some really great stuff to say around being gay, Catholic, being in the sports world, things such as that. His name is Scott Pomfret. And he's found a beautiful way to bridge the two worlds of sexuality and faith in his latest novel, Only Say the Word, by NineStar Press Ltd. So why beat around the bush? Let's just bring him on. Let's start talking. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, thanks, Rick. I appreciate you having me on the podcast. It's the themes you mentioned, the Catholic and the sports piece. I know you've been talking with folks recently on both those themes, and those talks really resonated with me.
Well, and I'm glad we finally connected. And it's kind of funny. So the audience kind of connected. I stumbled across Scott. I have a cool little contact form on my website that tells people that they can, submit to say they want to be on the show. And then lo and behold, one day I happened to be in the back end of the website looking around at other stuff. I'm like, wonder what those 2 little red numbers mean. And then I clicked on them like, oh my gosh, there's like messages waiting here from people who've been wanting to be on the show. And I found out the system wasn't working. So I'm glad we did because I've checked out some of Scott's stuff and I just thought, you know what, you're right. This is a really good fit for the Coming Out Loud. So why don't we start back when it all began for you, Scott, wherever you feel comfortable diving in. When was that moment for you in your life when you finally realized, okay, I'm not quite like the rest of the boys?
It's interesting. My partner, who happens to be also named Scott, knew at age 4 that he was gay because he loved to hug men's legs and sort of rub his face in the hairy legs. I did not have that experience. In fact, it wasn't until late in high school that I began sort of flirting with the idea of difference. It was more putting a name on it because I had felt different in some way but hadn't associated it with sexuality. And then in sort of classic fashion, I fell in love with my best friend, and it did not work out. He's still a very, very, very close friend, but it did not work out at the time the way I had hoped. And that little foray, in sort of early college years frightened me. And I went back into the closet and didn't end up sort of fully embracing myself until age 29.
Wow. You and I have similar stories. Except mine was about 10 years, well, not quite 10 years later. I was 36 when I came out, but I kind of had the same thing happen. I figured some stuff out in college and actually high school. Again, I had my best friend, I definitely had a huge crush on him. And I remember graduation weekend standing there like bawling my eyes out because I knew we were going to 2 separate colleges. And I didn't really get it until I walked away from him one evening over graduation weekend because I went to a private church college and graduation was like a whole weekend event. It started on Friday night, went all the way through Sunday afternoon. I remember walking away from him on Saturday evening, and that was kind of like the light bulb moment. I'm like, okay, wait, I have all sorts of other friends that are going off to other colleges, and this feels completely different. And that was the first time I'm like, oh, this is something to do with really like feeling feelings for this guy. And then I brushed him aside. I kind of knew about it, and I think like a lot of us guys that have gone through this, there were, moments in my life where I thought about him in the privacy of my own little bedroom and stuff, but I never let anybody else in on the secret, so to speak, until 19 in college. And then once I did, and those who've listened to the podcast know, that's when I came out to my parents, didn't work out so well, and I went back in the closet. So tell me a little bit about the going back in for you. Was it more of you still kind of knew, but you were in denial, or you just...
It was interesting. It's actually tied to the Catholic thing in some ways, not because of, shame, because the Catholic Church says, sexual activity between men is wrong,
right,
but because I met a woman who still to this day, tremendous Catholic faith. And I thought to myself, we have such a spiritual connection, that maybe I can make this work.
Right.
And it wasn't that I was denying the feelings I had had for my friend or other men, but just this feeling like, maybe I can just skate by, sort of skate around the danger zone, this one special woman. And in fact, we dated. I would say we, came flirtingly close to, having a marriage proposal before we collectively wised up, and she has gone on to marry a much better man than me. But again, somebody that I am still spiritually very tight with, although I don't see her any longer because she's moved out of the area.
Right. That's awesome, though. I think it's amazing when you find those people that you can connect with and helps you through your journey, which I think is something really important for anybody who's listening. Is we talk a lot about, finding your circle and having your support circle, but I also believe that kind of like spirit animals, so to speak, I believe there's always going to be one or two people in our coming out journey, especially early on, that really are going to be those key people who help us really see ourselves in beautiful light. And as I've worked with different people and asked them those questions, almost every one of my clients that I've worked with have said, yeah, there's always been one or two that kind of gave me that different look at things. So
that's right. I think of them as bridges. I think of them as the people that help you move from one place to a much more accepting place. And they might not even be doing it consciously. They may be serving that role in an unconscious way by, listening, by loving without judgment, and giving you a safe space to begin to, take the next step on the journey. There's a danger of getting sort of trapped there.
Yeah.
But like I said, I think of them as bridges, and they are really just helping you get across, the chasm of fear, the chasm of isolation.
So I'm curious, I know a lot of your books focus around, kind of the sports world and the Catholicism and things such as that. So tell us a little bit about yourself as a high school guy. Were you a jock? Were you really kind of one of those guys, or where did you fall on that whole spectrum?
There are some people that sort of present in a way that people immediately, at least think they're gay, whether they are or not. I think I've had the luxury of being able to so-called pass, and that can be an advantage in the sense that people get to know you first before they start, slapping the gay label on it. I was a high school football captain of the football team. I was very into downhill skiing. I'm so very much a sporting person. After college, I actually went back to my high school and helped coach the high school team. Coached at that school and another school for 5 years before I went on to law school. And it was one of the best experiences I've had. In fact, I still miss it to this day. The preparing for the games, the helping kids to achieve, the best that they can to get to the places they want to be, at least as an athlete. And I had never before written a ton about sports, a couple of short stories. And it was probably around 2003, 2004. My partner and I were writing some gay romance novels together, and I had this idea of a sporting one and never got around to it. And in 2013, really driven by all these professional athletes and high school athletes and college athletes coming out, which I think you talked about in an episode a few weeks ago. Those things were happening. I'm like, it's time. This is the time to get this story out. It's going to be too late, in 2 years or 3 years. In a good way, too late, but too late. And that's sort of what made me write what I called the second half, a gay American football story.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought Sid up, because one of the things that Sid was very adamant about when I interviewed him, and for those of you who didn't hear the interview, it's with Sid Ziegler. He's co-founder of Out Sports, so go check it out. I can't remember which episode it is right now, but it's one of the more recent episodes in the last couple of months. And what I loved about what he brought forth was the easiest and best thing for athletes at this stage to be out and be proud is simply to allow them to come out. That it's so simple. And he kept saying that throughout the interview, and the more he said it, I mean, I'm obviously an advocate of, let people be people and let them come out when they're ready to do this. But I think what he was getting at is there's a stigma for any of us coming out, but there seems to be some other layer of stigma when you get to the sports world and you get to the entertainment world, where it's almost like you have to have this other permission to come out and be this. And I just loved how he positioned that. Just allow them to just come out and just be who they are. It's such a huge step.
I think it's important. I think to people who are athletes, who are in the closet, I think it's helpful to, extend an invitation to them, not out them, but extend the kind of invitation that, this podcast, amongst other things, is doing. And that's part of what I was trying to do is, isolation is one of the things that makes fear bigger. So for, a high school kid, a college kid who is an athlete, is proud of being an athlete, to give them a story. In the case of Outsports, a lot of real life stories. In the case of my novel, a fictional story, but to give them stories that they can relate to and understand that they are not alone and that there is a fuller self out there, might even, amongst other things, make them a better athlete. Exactly. Because they're not carrying the burden of, trying to shield themselves from everybody and not accepting help and listening ears.
Well, I think that's a very astute observation. And when I see clients, which I don't get to actually ever meet most of my clients, which is kind of ironic, but I see them on Skype or whatever if we choose to work face to face. But one of the things that I notice is as they come through the process, the weight begins to literally lift off their shoulders. I mean, I see it in their posture, I see it in how they present, all these different things. And it was during the interview with Sid that we had a conversation around, how this mentally can release them as well, and it could have an impact on their performance, because when you're carrying this guilt, this shame, this double story, living this double life, it's pretty intense. And then on top of that, you're already doing something very intense, which is performing to other people's expectations in the public eye. And the two just kind of, as I said in the intro, it's kind of hard to make these two worlds meet in the middle somewhere that makes it really simple for athletes. So you brought up the word fear, as you were talking just a minute ago, and it spawned me to want to ask this question. So, we've gone through a lot in the last couple of months with not only our lovely political process that's going on and a lot of LGBT stuff showing up on the political front, but then, of course, we've gone through Orlando at this point as well. I'm curious, as a guy in that, you and I are both in that range of 40s, 50s sort of guys. What are you afraid of right now as a gay man? Is there anything that sticks out to you?
The biggest thing to me, and it's really a combination of Orlando and what I think of as the political dialogue that not made Orlando possible, but actually made it inevitable. This high-pitched anti-gay rhetoric that's being tossed around, including as, part of the actual GOP platform as it stands right now. What makes me afraid is that it is possible to go backward. And I think, particularly amongst my younger mentees and friends, they, I think, had pre-Orlando more confidence that things couldn't turn back, and now I and them, from what they tell me, are worried again that the clock could get turned back. The same way that who would have thought it was possible that 40 years after the fact, Britain would leave the EU. Things can go back, and so I am living in a sort of unsettled, and I've been unsettled since Orlando, space where I'm sort of looking over my shoulder at, okay, where can it go wrong? Where can we plug the holes here to prevent the tide from turning back against us?
I was recently in Chicago, and I was chatting with a young gay guy there that I know him a little bit. I happened to be at a podcast convention, and we've crossed paths a couple of times, and I asked him that question. I said, as a young gay man, what are you most afraid of right now? And he's like, not really anything. I said, seriously, in light of, Orlando, you don't have any fear? He goes, well, I can't really live in fear. He goes, I'm going to go out. I'm still going to be who I am. And I said, I'm glad to hear that that's how you feel. Because, yes, personally, I don't want to live in fear either. But I think there's this historical forefront we're on right now, where enough inciting events to create fear could potentially cause anything to happen. You know, that if this continues to happen where everything is based on the fear of, you know, not enough conservatism and all this other stuff that we don't really know. I think, at least in my lifetime, first time in my lifetime, that I feel like I don't really know what could possibly happen here because it's such a crapshoot. It's just
absolutely. It seemed like before that there were certain things that were beyond the pale, and now it doesn't seem like there's much of anything beyond the pale, you know, given everything that's happened in the last couple of months.
What if you're, you know, you're crowning, and this is a big question, and usually people like want to throw daggers at me when I ask questions like this, but what's been for you like that big moment once you came out of the closet where you really were like, okay, I'm truly being me? You know, there's that moment we come out of the closet, which is part of that. But I know for myself, and again, clients I've worked with and then other people I've interviewed here on the podcast, there's always like another moment or two, and I think they repeat themselves several times through our life, but where you finally like, I'm cool with being me. My gay self, I'm totally in this group. Was there any other defining moment for you, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of two. We talked a little bit about how coming out could improve an athlete's performance. You know, as a fiction writer and a memoir writer, you know, I felt entirely freer and much more creative post coming out because I could write now about anything. You know, didn't mean I was necessarily writing, you know, gay characters, gay themes, but I could. You know, and that freedom was tremendously just releasing. I felt like my wings had opened. I do make it a point now of whatever I'm writing to include gay characters, even if it's not necessarily, you know, gay themed, because I think we all need to, in one way or another, we all need to tell our stories in one way or another to make us part of, you know, the American story as much as, you know, mom and apple pie and sports, you know, to make gay part of the American story. The other thing that I will never, ever forget is I was here in Massachusetts in 2003, 2004 when Massachusetts was the first and only state at the time to legalize same-sex marriage. And there was a big backlash push where they tried to amend our Constitution, and we were up. We lost and we lost and we lost, and ultimately we won. And on that final day when the final vote was being taken, I was up at the Massachusetts State House, and we were singing patriotic songs, and we were, you know, chanting, and, you know, there was just all of us jammed together. And next to me at that time was my Irish Catholic mother standing, and the word came out, you know, first as a little whisper that nobody quite believed that we had managed to win by 2 votes and defeat the constitutional amendment. You know, she was right there with me, and then I felt like, all right, you know, this is it. This sort of, we preserved this big step. You know, had no idea we were going to get where we are today. You know, we knew it was a gigantic milestone. And for me, being present, and in particular being present with my boyfriend and my mother, was very meaningful and very personal event.
So take me into that be present piece for you. What does it mean for you to be present with someone, or to be present in a situation?
That's interesting. To me, it is a lot about being able to speak without holding back. And I don't mean, you know, rudeness. I mean where you're speaking not necessarily with a purpose, but kind of letting flow, the same way I think about writing, you know, sort of letting the creativity flow. I'm not a huge chit-chatter or talker, but also, you know, part for me of being in the moment with somebody is making sure that that's not a one-way street, you know, that the ears are open, that old thing about having 2 ears, because listening is more important than speaking. That kind of flow between people. And it doesn't mean that you're going to, you know, get along with them. Doesn't mean you're going to like them, but it is a moment when I feel wholly with them. You know, I'm a lawyer, so I can often need not to be like that in an oppositional sort of situation. But yeah. I found, in fact, that sometimes, you know, that opening up even in those oppositional situations actually gets you to a better place than sort of banging heads.
Yeah, I agree 100%. The reason I brought that question forward is, first, you brought it out very eloquently, and it's something we talk about from time to time here on the podcast. But I think in this time, especially in our U.S. history that's happening and unfolding right before us, I think oftentimes we forget to be present with what's happening. We immediately jump to, okay, well, before you can even finish saying what you're saying, I'm going to be, ready to jump in. And before we can, really assess, and I've caught myself doing this a few times in the last month or so, I see something on Facebook and it's some article or something that somebody says about the political climate or what's going on with, our African American brothers and sisters. And I immediately jump and I'm like, wait, I need to start being present with this and let's really be here with this. And oftentimes people who work with me say, okay, but I just can't keep defending myself with my family or friends or, whoever about my sexual orientation. And the question I will ask them is, but have you really been present with them? Or are you already rushing ahead? Are you already getting ready for the defense? The defensive tackle, so to speak. And it's very interesting to watch them first react to that question, but then to also start to dive into, well, what does that mean exactly? How would I do that? And it's often the beginning of the real change for them where they go, okay, I may not agree with my family or I may not agree with a boss or a friend who doesn't get my sexual orientation, but now I'm given room to hear them out, so to speak, and be present with them through the process. And oftentimes it leads to some pretty amazing results when people are able to do that. So.
One of the things I wrote about this in the Catholic novel that you mentioned, Only Through the Word, as well as a memoir I wrote on the same topic. One of the things that I have been saying to myself and to others constantly in the last couple of months is to, make sure you are reacting and interacting with people out of a place of humility and, don't allow your certainty about something, get in the way of having a gentle conversation, an open conversation with people. Part of what built this political situation is there's a lot of certainty on each side that actually prevents us from talking to one another or attempting to build bridges. And I'm not suggesting that you assume you're wrong. It's just that you assume the possibility something about the way you're presenting or what you're presenting is wrong.
I love that you use that terminology, assume the possibility, because I think this is where we as humans shut the doors too quickly. We don't allow, and I guess because I'm going through something personal right now around something where somebody has completely shut the door, and it's very hard because as soon as that door is closed, there is no possibility. Even if you're the one who says, but I want there to be something else we can talk about, if the other person has shut that door and no, there's no other way to look at this, that's when the real breakdowns come in my mind, because we don't give room for the discussion to continue. Now, we may get to some place where that discussion absolutely cannot continue anymore because one or the other or both sides are dug in, but number one, come from a space of love, and number two, come from a space of possibility. So you kind of dropped that little hint that this writing novels isn't your full-time thing, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit because I think a lot of times people think that something like coming out is going to become their entire life. It's going to be that whole, everything is going to hinge around this, which I believe it does. You can't just be gay in the bedroom. You take your gay with you wherever you go. But when it comes to the work environment, something I've really encouraged a lot of my clients to do is find the space where who you are, in all aspects of who you are, fits in the environment that you're in. And, especially because I do a lot of work with entrepreneurs, and then figure out where your side hustle is for all that other stuff you want to do in your life. So as I was doing research on you and seeing what you did, I thought, this is pretty cool because he's an attorney, but then he's also got this side hustle thing of writing all these really cool novels about being gay and being Catholic and being in the sports world. So I'm assuming that has been a very conscious choice to try to keep the two lives delineated to some degree?
When I was first co-writing novels with my boyfriend then and now, back in, again, the 03, 04, 05 time frame, we were very much out there, deliberately so. We saw it as having some resonance with the same-sex marriage issue, getting stories of, gay men living happily ever after out into the world and so on and so forth. I was working for the government actually at the time, and so this, very much out. I actually founded the gay lesbian affinity group for the agency that I worked for at the time. And, so it's very much part and parcel of my work. When I switched gears to go back to the private sector, I made a conscious choice to write under a pen name for that time because I really wanted to focus on that piece of my career. I did not by any means go back into the closet, but my writing went into the closet, which is to say it took us a back seat for the time. And, I really came to the end of that phase where I was ready to, be out there again as a gay romance writer, amongst other things, and decided, to basically come back out as a writer. And I think that's sort of indicative of, we talk about coming out as if it happens once, and clearly it happens again and again and again. And that can feel exhausting, I think, to somebody who hasn't gone through the first once, where they're just like, oh my God, I'm going to have to do this forever and ever. And yeah, in some ways it is a little exhausting, but it's also, it's a new opportunity every time. And if you can focus on that new opportunity rather than, having to retell your story for the thousandth time to a new person, I think that's a healthier way of looking at it.
Like I said, I was at a big podcasting conference a couple of weeks ago, and once again, there I was coming out because, my podcast is called The Coming Out Lounge. So as soon as I say, the inevitable question is, oh, what's the name of your podcast? Well, mine's called The Coming Out Lounge. Oh, so you must do work in the LGBTQ community. Yep, but I also do work with people from all walks of life because we've all got closets. We're all hiding something in these closets. And as soon as I would say that, it became very relatable. People really were like, wow, yeah, you're right. There's always something each of us is hiding away. It may not be the terminology we use of, you're coming out, but it's becoming more and more. I've heard the phrase used more and more in different, connotations and different ways in the last year. So let's talk about the books because we haven't got there yet, and I want to really kind of look at, as many of them as we can, but so let's start with the very first one. What was the very first one that you're like, yeah, here I go. I'm actually writing this book, and it's going to come to life?
So again, way back in 2003, my partner and I put together a book called Hot Sauce that was originally set. The ending was going to involve a civil union in Vermont because that's what existed at the time. Mm-hmm. And right in the middle of our writing it, same-sex marriage comes to Massachusetts, and we're like, oh my God, we got to rewrite the ending. That was the first time. We had no idea whether these were going to resonate. We had no idea who they were going to resonate with. And we picked up an agent, and then we, next thing you know, and it all happened like one thing after another, Hachette, the New York publisher, was interested in putting this out there. And, we jaunted down to New York City for a photo shoot and all this crazy stuff. And we're like, oh my God, this is actually going to happen. And it was, terrifically exciting for us. And, we were busily writing. All our vacations were writing vacations at the time.
So
and
how many books do we have now at this point?
So my partner and I have 7 co-written books that are romance novels, 1 co-written book that is a guide to wine and cocktails, and which was a lot of fun to write and good tax deductions. And I have a memoir called Since My Last Confession, a gay Catholic memoir that's about the experience of being in a church and ultimately getting kicked out of a church, a Catholic church in Massachusetts around the time of the same-sex marriage fight. Then I took my break, and I'm back this year with 4 books. One is Only Say the Word. That's a Catholic one, really riffing off the memoir in a more lyrical, sort of fact-based account of a relationship between a younger devout Catholic and an older boyfriend who is as anti-Catholic as you can get, and what happens with them. And again, in that book, I depict a similar sort of political rhetoric, that existed around the time of same-sex marriage in Massachusetts. Very, very shrill, times felt dangerous, and I write about that in Only Say the Word. I've got a book of short stories called You Are the One, that half of them are set in the Don't Ask, Don't Tell world. I'm not a military person, but I, was inspired by some of what I saw of people coming out in the military or post-military, and so book short stories, about half of which have to do with that. I have I mentioned the football novel, the second half, which is the story of a college coach who falls in love with his quarterback, but the quarterback is an older guy because he served in Afghanistan before rejoining his football team. So again, a little bit of a military theme team, again, trying to achieve this sort of American experience of football and moms and all that kind of stuff. And, writers aren't supposed to have favorites, but my absolute favorite, I'm an Irish American. My mother's actually born in Ireland, didn't come here until she was about 30 years old. It's called The Hunger Man, which is a historical novel narrated by a slutty gay fairy, Irish fairy, and tells the story of surviving the great famine, the potato famine in the mid-19th century.
You really have fun with your writing, don't you?
I love it, although I tell people, I have to find my audience over and over. You talk about coming out over and over again. I have to find my audience over and over again because I write really different stuff.
Stuff, yeah.
Exactly.
I get that because I've got like 3 or 4 books, quote unquote, in the works, and it's like, okay, which of my lovely little children do I really bring to life next? Because they all are very different. I've written my memoir. It's, Frankly, My Dear, I'm Gay. It's out there. It's quote unquote my memoir, at least up until I came out. But I don't see wanting to produce another one of those anytime soon. But then I have fun with, things that happen here in the coaching, the coaching world of helping people come out. I think there's a lot of humor in this that people tend to think, oh, coming out is all down and sad. And no, there's a lot of fun stuff that happens. And that's the stuff I really want to celebrate. So that's one book I really want to get out. But then there's a whole other side of this, as I alluded to, around, everybody's closeted about something, And so my next book that I'm really writing about is this bigger journey of what are we all closeted about and how can we embrace our uniqueness as individuals and just all of us accept this beautiful thing called expression of self, really be fully self-expressed so that everybody can be who they're intended to be on the planet and really own that beautiful self. So how many books you've got? Like, 4 or 5 that just came out. So what's the goal for the rest of the year, man? It seems like you can turn these out pretty quickly. So,
Yeah, they've actually been in that time that I was writing under a pen name. I had still been writing, just hadn't published them. So I'm at work on another historical novel as we speak and a bunch of short stories. I can't keep myself from writing. I'm sure you feel the same. It just draws you in. And
although I have to say, it kind of gets crazy because now that I'm podcasting and now that I'm starting to do some speaking on stages, the writing kind of has gone by the wayside because there's only so many hours in the day, and writing is that thing that nobody else can. Yes, you can hire a ghostwriter, but nobody else quite write it the way you do, so
yep.
There is no hiring a VA to go, okay, can you go write my book for me? It doesn't really happen that way at all. So what is your real true passion to write about? I mean, I know novels and, all of this is, the gay, the Catholic, the sports stuff, but if you had to pick one that you say, yeah, this is what I'm really passionate about, what would it be?
I'll be honest, it is that gay, slutty Irish fairy with sort of magical powers and a touch with the other world, who really understands being at the edge of the living world and the spirit world. I just love that. And the character is playful and wicked and mischievous. And I plan to bring, I'm not sure when, but I plan to bring that character back to another book at some point.
It's awesome. It's interesting that you have that one as kind of your favorite. As I was going through my coming out process, going through my divorce, adjusting to being a single gay father, all that stuff, I remember drawing really, really closely to my daughters. And those moments are still some of the most precious moments of my initial coming out journey. And they were young. They were 18 months old and not quite 6 when I started this journey. And the nights that I had them, I was blessed, number one, to have them because I'm like, okay, they were my rocks in so many ways. And I started by reading them stories, and then one night I remember I just like, I can't read another Disney story. I can't, even though they loved them, I couldn't do it. And I think there was divine intervention that showed up because the next words out of my mouth were, so Daddy's going to tell you a story about someone really special. And her name is Heidelberry, and she's this magical fairy. And it just started. And I kind of wish I would have been writing at that point in time because I know in those moments, this Heidelberry the fairy, she came to life. And they still remember that, both of them. And now they're 21 and 17. And I said to them not too long ago, I said, do you girls still remember Heidelberry? And they're both, oh yeah, we remember those stories and how you used to just make these stories and that was all impromptu, all improv. Every night would be something different, and maybe it would involve something I did that day or something I encountered. But it was almost like she was my little, I know this sounds weird, token fairy for my coming out journey. She was the one who helped me like really hold that space for me and my daughters to go through that initial journey, because it was pretty much hell for a first few years.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. And no doubt, she really carried you guys,
well, she
through.
did, and I've often thought about, and maybe something will happen when I, become that, that first grandparent thing starts to happen. Well, maybe I'll go, well, maybe that'll be the memoir thing I write to my grandchildren, Heidelberry's Adventures of Coming Out or something out. We will see. Well, as we're wrapping up, Scott, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for being here and sharing yourself. We're going to have your website at scottpomfret.com up on the show pages, and we'll have everything linked over there so that people can get in touch with you. As we wrap up, the question I really would love to know is if you could give somebody a gift right now, a gift of coming out, of knowing they're going to be okay, what would you love to leave the listeners with?
I would encourage them to become storytellers themselves, not necessarily writing novels or poetry or whatever, but the gift I would give them is a voice so that they can bear witness to their own selves. And because, as you've alluded to with Sid on that show, that there's nothing more powerful than all of us in a chorus, bearing witness to who we are and normalizing that. I don't mean normalizing meaning making us sort of heteronormative, but make our weirdness or our difference, whatever it is that you perceive in yourself, making that part of, sort of a national story, a local story, a national story, because I think, there's nothing changes minds more than the storytelling process. We've seen that again and again in the same-sex marriage arena, persuading legislators to act the right way. And it's all about the storytelling. So that's the gift I want to give to somebody who's really at the very start of this journey. And
that's a beautiful gift, because when we can tell, and I see this every time I go speak at a college or a university, when I'm sitting in those classrooms of, sexuality classes, psychology, sociology, whatever they may be, when we can tell our story, which is exactly how we do it. There's usually 3 or 4 of us on a PFLAG panel, and each of us will tell our story, whether you're a gay man, a lesbian, a transgender, a parent, ally. We each tell that story, and the moment that the story gets told, the humanity shows up. Pretty hard to fight humanity when you can hear the real story.
You can't argue with the story.
The story is the truth, and it's always touching to me to see someone the very first time that they join us on a panel and watch their nervousness and then see them just, okay, I'm telling this. It's almost like their stage debut. They're going for that story, and it's amazing to watch them transform, and it's amazing to watch the audience transform with those brand new speakers. And, I speak all the time, so I know how to get in that space when I'm on the stage. But I love the newbie speakers who are just so raw, so real, so honest, so organic, that you can see the audience immediately react to, oh, wow, I haven't ever felt this before. So great stuff that you're leaving the audience with, Scott. I really, truly appreciate it.
Great. Rick, thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys, as you know, love what you hear, you know where to go. You go to iTunes and Stitcher and Facebook, all those places, and you promote and you help us get the word out, because even if you may not need something that you heard today, you probably know someone. There may be an athlete out there who's struggling. There may be someone who's hiding. You kind of have a feeling that they're hiding. You don't have to out them. All you have to say is, wow, I happened to be listening to this podcast today called The Coming Out Lounge, and there was this great author named Scott, and Rick, the host, they talked about coming out and being in sports and being Catholic and how you tell your stories, and your stories is what makes the difference. These are the sort of things that will help you not only help someone else, but help you help yourself to be proud and tall and be who you're meant to be here in the world. And that's what this podcast is all about, is helping each and every one of us find our voice and be who we're meant to be in the world. So if you're struggling with that, please connect up with us. There's all sorts of opportunities here on the Coming Out Lounge website, from one-on-one sessions to my book to different ways to step into the work of starting to find yourself. It's all here for you. It's all available. If there's anything you need. In fact, there's even a free confidence course here on the site to help you down that path. So connect up with us. Take advantage of what we have to offer. And as always, never stop stepping out, stepping up, and stepping into living your powerful truth. I'm Rick Clemens, the Coming Out Coach, and you've been listening to the Coming Out Lounge, and we will catch you in just a few days. Thanks for being here and giving us the pleasure of your time. Hey, closet dwellers and Coming Out Lounge listeners, I wanted to ask you a question. If you could take stress out of your journey, be more content in who you are, and find ways to do some of the most difficult things that you need to do as you come through the closet doors, would you do it? I bet the answer is yes. Why do I know this? Because I have been getting requests from listeners and clients or prospective clients about finding ways to just address certain things in their coming out journey. Some people don't want to work for a long time, and I totally get that. And that's why I've designed some brand new coming out coaching one-on-one sessions. These are very focused, topic-specific sessions. For example, maybe you're looking at coming out midlife and how do you do it? Could be that you're already out, but you're not completely out and you want to talk about how do I do this and come out at work. Could be that you're having trouble even accepting yourself as a gay person. And might there be a possibility that you're really struggling with your sexuality and your religion? Depending on what you're looking for, I've designed 9 powerful, highly focused one-on-one laser coaching sessions that you can choose from. Each session goes for 90 minutes. We stay specifically focused on the topic at hand. And each of these sessions also includes a copy of my book, Frankly, My Dear, I'm Gay. So now that you've heard about this, how would you like to go check them out? Well, here's how you do this. Go to thecomingoutcoach.com. On that page, you can scroll down. You'll see stuff for the book and for some other offerings, but then you'll see one-on-one coaching sessions. Click on that button, and it will take you to a page that describes each of the 9 offerings that I have. If you happen to be listening to the podcast right now, just look over to the right-hand side of the show page, and you'll see one-on-one coaching sessions right there. Again, just click on that button and go check out these new offerings. So, what do you think? Isn't it about time that you stepped out, you stepped up, and you stepped into resolving whatever the biggest issue is in your coming out journey? I'm Rick Clemens, the Coming Out Coach, and I can't wait to work with you one-on-one.
You've just experienced the Coming Out Lounge. Go online to www.comingoutlounge.com to learn more, and tune in again next week for more stories and tips for being true to yourself.